Support Lightning Debate on Patreon.
Hi guys, how's it going? Jeff here, and I'm coming at you with part 3 of the LD for Dummies series. So before we get into the video, I just want to apologize for not being able to upload on Saturday and Sunday like I said I would. Some family dropped in for the Labor Day weekend unexpectedly, and that just ruined my recording schedule. So instead of making videos for the last 2 days, I've been, hanging out with family, fixing things around. So it's been a mess, but I finally have some downtime. So to make up for it for you guys on this Labor Day, my Labor Day gift to you, even though we don't give gifts on Labor Day, is double uploading. So I'm gonna be putting 2 videos out today, so you guys can have be tided over from the weekend since most of you are off for Labor Day. So let's just get right into this first video, which is how to win the framework. And this has been suggested by Dylan, who's always in the comments. Thank you, Dylan. I'm gonna thank you for the shout out. All right, so let's just get right into the video. So the first thing I want to do is recap what we already covered in the series so far. So in the first episode, we covered the importance of ought, and we taught you how to choose and write your framework. We also told you how to write your case of contention. So if you haven't seen the previous parts, you should check the description below to see them, or check the sidebar. They should be up there. Subscribe to the channel while you are there, and like the video. It really helps out the channel. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about are the types of frameworks, because there are different types of framework and they mean different things in different styles of debate. So in PF, what it really means are, we're usually are talking about when they talk about the framework, are observations. Observations, I'm going to explain them a little later, but that's what we're usually talking about. Unless you're on the West Coast, then you're going to be looking at more of the policy style of framework in combination with these observations. In LD, you're going to see more of a value criterion of debate. Unless you are in the higher levels debate or on the West Coast, then you're going to see again more of a policy style approach to the framework. And in policy, it can be one or either both of these. So the only difference with policy is there's a little tingent to the value criterion structure. Instead of there being a value criterion, they're just encompassed both as a framework. It's usually just the criterion though, not the value. Okay, so first things we're going to talk about is public forum framework and what are observations. So an observation is simply just a proposed rule for how the debate should proceed based off things that you already know before the debate starts. An example of this would be observation 1. Since the resolution takes place inside the United States, impacts to the United States are weighed before any other impacts. Now that seems self-explanatory, but because you place this rule, you make it known upfront to the judge, listen, things that affected the U.S. are weighed as more important and then more important than anything else based on the information you already know, and that being the resolution being set in the U.S. All right, so when should you use them? So you should use them whenever the resolution has what like to call a contingency clause. So most resolutions, well, when you explain them to someone who's not really in debate, they basically line up in your head something like this: resolved, bears should be outlawed. Something very simple, cut and dry. There's no contingency clause because it's not necessary to add an observation unless you have a case-specific reason, which you're going to talk about later. However, if the resolution is, okay, bears should be outlawed in Oregon during 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., now you have contingency clauses, and the two contingency clauses are going to be one, the Oregon contingency that it's only outlawed in Oregon. So, like, okay, how does that affect it as opposed to anywhere, everywhere else? And the time contingency, why that specific time? How does that time affect the debate and the debate space that you're going to have? Okay, so another time you should use them is when you have an argument that needs framing. For example, right? Contention 1, resolution causes death. Yeah, you don't need to explain or have an observation that death is bad because everyone knows death is bad. It's the number 2 fear in America behind public speaking. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone's going to agree with you. Death is bad. No one is going to argue against you on the observation. So you're actually going to lose. You put an observation, death is bad, because those 5 seconds you used to say death is bad are never going to be useful. And you could have said something else more useful, but then saying death is bad in those 5 seconds. Alright, whereas if you say contention 1, resolution causes civilian discomfort, yeah, that's not really a great impact on its own. However, if you use a different sort of framing, and you say, okay, we want to frame it, observation 1, the quality of life of citizens is the most important thing, discomfort is because it gets a huge boost in impact, because like, okay, it's not a huge impact on a general scale, but on the scale of quality of life, civilian discomfort, like mass civilian discomfort, significantly decreases the quality of life of citizens. So on that scale of observation 1, say quality of life should be prioritized, that shows that, okay, civilian discomfort matters. So that becomes an essential playing point that you can use in your debate. So that's when you really should use an observation to your advantage. So let's move over to Lincoln Douglas. So value criterions. Values are proposed principles that should be upheld during the debate. For example, my value for this round will be fairness. So how are you going to, what does that mean? This means that the debate should be looking to maximize the principles of fairness, and the winner should be the one who does so. All right, so the next thing you want to talk about are criterions. Criterions are indicators of success for achieving your principle. So an example is my criterion for this round should be the quality of opportunity. What this means is that the way to measure who is more fair is by seeing who creates the most equality of opportunity with their case. All right, so then the next thing I want to talk about are observations are optional in LD. You can use them and combine them with your value criterion. Most higher level cases tend to do this when they require more framing for their arguments and their impacts. However, if you were to use them, they're going to be in the same way you would use them in a PF case, but it's not expected you to use observations in LD. All right, and see part 1 for more information on value criterions. I delve quite extensively on how they work, what they are, and how to write them. So if you're confused at all on value criterions, I would suggest you watch part 1. Okay, so this one I'm going to be covering policy debate framework. So the framework, it's going to be either philosophical, observational, or both. So observational, it's just like PF with the observations. You typically go a couple observations in. I'd suggest 3 observations in general if you're spreading, which you should be spreading at this point unless you're a novice. Philosophical, you'd be based on like an established philosophy. Later on this channel, I'll be putting out a philosophy video on a philosophy you'd use and should know for debate. So you should be delving into either one of those philosophies if it's appropriate. All right, so an example in a framework would be based off utilitarianism. If you don't want to know what it is, check out a later video coming out of the channel on what philosophies you should know for debate. And basically, when you say like your framework's based off utilitarianism, it means that the debate will be based off the principles outlined in that particular school of philosophy. And again, you should be familiar with the philosophy and how it works, as well as being able to explain it to your judge or your opponent if they are unfamiliar with it, because if you don't know what it is and they don't know what it is, then you just look stupid. I'm just saying. Okay, so how to debate on framework. This is the real nitty-gritty on what you should do when you are faced with a framework. So the person who wins the framework gets to set the rules of the debate. So it's pretty important to make sure that you are able to get your framework to win, to give yourselves the best chance of winning the overall debate. So the first way you want to make sure you win the framework debate is attack your opponent's framework and bolster your own framework. So when you're attacking your opponent's framework, you want to make sure that you want to look at these sort of things. So first thing you might want to look at is fairness. Okay, so if your opponent's framework gives them like an unfair advantage, so let's say their opponent's framework is I should win. Like, okay, that's not a good framework. And trust me, if you see someone running a meme case, one of their observations you should vote for the app because I want to. So if you see something like that, you can say, okay, deny that framework because it's impossible for me to win under that framework, and they're only using that framework in order to game the system. Therefore, you shouldn't use that as a way to indicate who should win the round. Something along those lines. Another way to attack your framework is logical inconsistency. This is the general way most debaters on the higher levels are going to attack frameworks, and they typically have a logical inconsistency for most frameworks to attack them with in cross-examination. So you want to find a way where that framework is in itself self-defeating or contradicts its own rules or clauses in explaining morality or explaining what one should do in a certain situation. So let's use a hypothetical example. So if someone uses a framework called contractarianism, where it says morality comes from social contracts, and you ask the question, is the state forcing a pacifist to kill others morally justifiable? If they tell you no, you can get up in your next speech and say, my opponent states that morality comes from the state, yet it says that the state can ask its citizens to do something immoral, meaning that morality does not come from the state. Therefore, their framework fails and it cannot be upheld since it cannot uphold itself, so you should default to my framework. Something along those lines. Trust me, it gets better with practice, and when you get more familiar with how frameworks are constructed and philosophy and the flaws in philosophy, you will get better and better and better in pointing out these logical inconsistencies. In fact, you might get too good and point them out in your friends when they happen. So, just as a fair warning when you get into this style of debate. All right, so the next thing you could do is bolster your framework, make your framework stronger. So the first thing the most common thing is done is importance. By saying, okay, you have a reason that you think your framework is important, you can say my framework is paramount due to whatever. So an example is my framework of consequentialism is paramount to their framework due to the fact that consequentialism accounts for all the potential consequences for an action before making an action, whereas their framework only considers one factor. See, with this, you've clearly stated why your framework is more important, why your opponent, your judge rather, should prefer voting on your framework and your set of rules because it is more all-encompassing, or it is more important, or has more relevance to the debate. The second thing is overlap, saying that there's an overlap between your framework and your opponent's framework. Okay, you can say it's yours better due to it being more overarching in some way. So this actually happened to me in an actual round where I had to say, okay, my framework of utilitarianism is the same as their framework of communitarianism due to them having the same principles of weighing good versus bad, and the only difference being where communitarianism only applies to the community and utilitarianism applies to everyone. Community is revolved around anyone. I impact more people than my opponent trying to impact just the community. So I can see, okay, mine has more overlap. So if I cause more good things for more people, therefore I beat communitarianism, which is only more good things for more people in a specific area. All right, so other methods to use, and these are my more favorite methods to use to try to take down someone's framework, is achieving opponent's framework. So sometimes when it's better to concede your opponent's framework, if you can try to prove that your case beats their framing or fits their framing better than their case. So you could say, okay, my case better achieves my criterion of utilitarianism since the death of millions is not outweighed by a couple $1,000s in savings the AF tells you about. Boom. You basically upend their side of the argument because now you're not arguing that their framework is wrong. You're just saying, I do it better. Because if you can win on your opponent's framework, it's really interrupting their rhythm. You're going to throw them off a bit. So that can really be a huge advantage if you can pull it off, if you do it right. All right, the second one is framework contention and consistency. So what this means is that saying that their contentions poorly hold up their framework. If you see it, you should point it out, but you get better at seeing it when you get more experience. So for example, you say, my opponent's contention make it impossible to hold equality because all their impacts of the AF make the rich richer and the poor poorer, widening the divide, making it harder to achieve my opponent's values. So saying, look, they can't even achieve their own framework. Therefore, if they can't achieve their own framework, why are we even bothering looking at it? We should be looking at my framework, which I try to achieve, or saying, look, they don't even achieve their framework, therefore they shouldn't even win the round. Okay, so that's really it for the video, guys. Like and subscribe, follow us on all social media platforms, support us on Patreon. I'll see you guys in the next video. Jeff out.